So this is the website of the firm that I run. It's called Hasgeek. Hasgeek creates community spaces. We organize events, we run a bunch of websites and so forth. I'm going to take you through a quick tour of what we do, and then I'm going to talk about how you build communities and how we did what we did. So you may have seen this website. It's fairly popular. It's a job portal. As Priya was telling you, she made her first recruit on this website. For the sake of running events, we also have a public process by which speakers can submit a proposal to say that they're going to speak at the event. So for instance, this is an event that happened in February. Here are the submission rules. So what Dylan told you about is how to write an article for publication in a magazine. Okay. Now this is my process for how to write a proposal to speak on stage. Okay. So these are the instructions that all potential speakers have to go through. And at the end of it, they can go submit a proposal. So let's say, for instance, that here is someone who's proposed to speak on a particular topic. Now this is what he's done. He's essentially said that this is what he's going to speak about. He's put out an objective saying that this is what I want you to get at the end of the process. To emphasize the changing nature of web and to encourage adoption of progressive enhancement. So that's his manifest. He's saying that this is what I want to achieve in the 45 minutes that I have on stage, and the rest of it is a description. So every speaker who comes to speak at one of our events has to go through this process where they first tell in advance and say this is what I'm going to do, and then the audience decides if they like it or not and if they're going to accept the speaker. We also archive videos of all the talks from all the events. So this is Hasgeek.tv where you can see all the videos. Now Meta Refresh, which just happened, and Sovic's proposal, which you just saw, is a video that's online and watchable by anyone. So now let's see, where is Sovic? Yes, there it is. So the video itself doesn't matter, so I'm going to mute it. But what you get here is his video and his slides. The slides will take a minute to load. So there's a complete video archive of everything that happens at these events. If you want the reference material, you can go back and watch it anytime in the future and so on. So we do this. We run a website called Hack Night. This is for hackathons. If you want to run a hackathon, just go to the website, register an event, invite people to come and so forth. I'll take you through a bunch of things that we have done for that. For instance, this is an event that was organized by a venture capital firm, and they put out a description saying this is what they want to achieve over this hackathon and so forth. And as you can see, a lot of people signed up. Okay? You can see it's a huge list. So most of these people actually showed up. We had about 250 people who came to this event as a result of simply advertising it on this website. So the number of people we deal with is quite large. As you can see, I'm just pulling this right out of the database right now. That's, I don't know if the number is very visible there, but that's essentially how many people have signed up for the website just to be updated about things that we are doing. And most of these people are in Bangalore. Okay? The job board that I just showed you has a huge number of jobs. There's roughly about 20 jobs posted here every day. Most of them get applications. So the numbers here indicate how many people have applied to these jobs. For instance, this one says 5 people have actually gone and submitted a job application saying I'm interested, I want this job, and so forth. And some stats from that. The total number of people who have applied for jobs in the last 1 year is 21,000. The number of jobs posted in the last 1 year is 12,000. So that's essentially a lot of jobs on this site and a lot of people applying for jobs. Now what I want to talk to you about is how did we get here? How did we create a community that has so many people so actively involved in it? It started about 3 years ago. In the year 2010, I organized this event. And what I want to do is go back from this flurry of activity that's currently going to step one. What did we do the very first time that created a process by which people came together to form a community and then continue to collaborate with each other. Okay? So in 2010, when I did this event, I essentially was acting out of frustration. I'm a programmer. I've been writing software for at least 20 years now. And one of my frustrations was I wanted to talk about the web because I was starting to think that it was finally becoming something that was a very serious platform. You didn't have to build desktop applications anymore. These days, you didn't even bother with desktop, it was all web. Now, obviously, today you will say mobile. But in 2010, mobile was not that interesting yet. It was, at that era, it was still about saying you can move everything to the internet now, you don't need desktop applications anymore. So, one of my frustrations at that point was it was really hard to get people to talk about this stuff with. That I may know something about making websites, I may have a few friends, but there are lots of smart people out here in this country, and the problem is they don't know each other. So how do you bring these people out and say, let's get together and talk? So one of the things that we had to do was to say, let's pick something that most of us who are in the field have heard of as something upcoming, and organize an event around it and say, let's come and meet at this physical venue and talk. Okay? And when you start doing this is the moment where you realize that what you're doing is not programming, it's actually sales. Okay? Now, how many of you here are in sales? Okay? The rest of you are wrong, you're all in sales. There is nobody in life who's not doing sales. You just don't realize it because you don't think of it as sales. If you have a job, you have essentially sold your talents to your employer. You've convinced your employer that I'm good, hire me. You made a sale. You don't think of it like this. But in fact, you're selling all the time in your life, whether you know this or not. It's simply a matter of what is it that you're selling and what are you getting in return. Most of the time when you say sales, you think of it as selling in return for money. That here is a good, give me some money. Or here is something I built for you, I've given you my time, give me some money. Often what you're doing in fact is selling in return for attention. That what you're telling someone is the one resource that you have a finite supply of, that you do not have too much of, is your time. Now you sitting here are obviously not sitting somewhere else, you're here. You have therefore decided to give your attention to this particular event and listen to me speaking. Okay? So in effect, I've made a sale. Now in fact, it's not me who's made a sale, but Priya who's made a sale. And convinced you to say, give your time and attention to this event, come here. Okay? So what Priya has done in the process of organizing this event is sold you the idea that you should spend your time here. Okay? And money you have an infinite supply of. You may be rich, you may be poor, it's variable. But time, everybody has only 24 hours in a day. And therefore, it is the most precious thing that you can purchase from someone. That you can convince someone to give you time is a form of sales. So what I realized when I was trying to do this event is that I had to think of this not as me, a programmer, getting a bunch of programmers together, but in effect a sales operation. Okay? And one aspect of thinking of it as a sales operation is what you're now dealing with is essentially a marketplace. Okay? When you bring people together in a room and say, let's talk to each other, everybody comes with some expectation. If you're sitting here on this chair, you have some expectation that brought you here. Okay? You're in that sense a buyer. You're a buyer of knowledge and you want some kind of knowledge, which is why you're here. You may or may not be getting it from me right now, but if you get it from one of the other talks in the day, then you earn something useful, so it's good enough. Can you put my charger? It's over there in the back on the chair. So the various people who come to an event are essentially there for different reasons. Okay? And in sales, you think of this as essentially a marketplace. That there is something being sold and something being bought over here. And if you understand who's here for what purpose, then you can make it something that's actually worth everybody's time. Okay? So in a typical event, you're essentially dealing with 4 kinds of parties that are involved over here. So the most obvious one is audience. People are here to listen to some speaker and they're here to get some kind of knowledge. So there's one category of participant in a marketplace, which is the audience. The second obvious category is the speaker. Somebody's got to do the actual talking on stage. So you need to convince the speaker to be on stage and talk to the audience. So once you do these 2 things, now are these 2 enough? You got people to speak, you got people to listen. What more do you need? The publicity is assuming it's done. People have already come. That's the speaker's job. The speaker speaks, the audience listens. What more do you want? No, but the content is what the speaker is providing, right? That's the whole point. That the speaker is the one who's brought the content and the audience is consuming the content. Okay? There are two things that are required on top of this. Somebody's got to arrange the whole thing. Okay? So the arrangement doesn't happen magically by itself. Somebody is doing this work of saying that I will bring these people together. So your third party is the people providing the logistical support. These could be your volunteers, these could be the various parties involved, some of which don't even need to know about this event. For instance, you took a taxi to come here. The taxi is essentially a logistics provider, but he's not something that the people in this event need to be concerned about because that is an external market service. Okay? Some things are a part of the facilities, like making sure this hall is available is somebody's job. So you have a logistics provider who's a third party. And there's yet another party, which is coming from the reality that there are some aspects of an event that cost money. Somebody's got to pay for the damn thing. Okay? If you want to say do a video recording, you have to buy a camera, or you have to own one, or you have to hire someone, and so on. So no matter what you do, there will always be a corner where you have to spend money, and somebody's got to pay for that. Now, you guys didn't pay to be here. Okay? So that got arranged for free. In fact, Priya made the payments for the lunch and for everything else that's gone into this place. Okay? Now that money is right now coming out of her own pocket, but it's not always the case. So usually what you want is also somebody to subsidize the financial costs of the event, and that's your fourth party, that you need a sponsor. Okay? So four parties that are involved in an event is the audience, the speaker, the organizers, and the various logistical operations, and the sponsor who covers the financial burden. So this is what I realized, that if I just want to speak to a bunch of programmers about web technologies, I have to think of a sales operation, building a four-sided marketplace where there is something in it for all four parties to come together and make this possible. Okay? And anytime you do anything that involves building a community, whether you're just building a follower base on Twitter or doing an event or whatever else, you have to think of it as four parties involved here. Somebody is producing the content, somebody is consuming the content, somebody is arranging the facilities, and somebody is paying for it. Okay? Ideally, you basically get all the various parties to pay for it themselves, but that's not always feasible. So when I started doing this, the part that I had to figure out is how do we make this work? So this is where I started from, and what I figured is if you try to solve all four problems at once, okay, it's an incredibly hard thing to pull off. Because anytime you go to someone and say, give me your attention, they'll say, why? What are you giving me in return? Now, if I had to say, I will do an event about HTML5, I need a speaker who actually knows the topic to go to an audience and say, please come and listen to this speaker. If I have a speaker and no audience, the speaker is going to say, why should I waste my time? Okay? So you've got a chicken and egg problem here. And the chicken and egg problem with only a chicken and egg is kind of much simpler. When you have four parties to deal with, it's even more harder. How do you convince all four that the other three exist and so you should come together? So the simplest way to do this is to not make it a four-piece problem and say, please solve only one problem at a time. Okay? So the first thing I did was to say, if I'm going to speak about HTML5, the easiest way I can get a speaker is if I become one. Okay? Which means I need to know this topic now. So what I did to start with is say, okay, first let's make sure I actually know what the heck we're talking about over here. Let me first study this topic in detail and prove that I know this topic by doing something. And my proof of concept was actually build this website. Okay? So I haven't been doing websites for a while at the time I did this event because I had been essentially pushed into management at my last job. So I spent a few months learning to program again, putting together the website for this event, and using the technologies that we're talking about as being something that everybody else should be using. One aspect of it, which should be obvious, is that this is a single-page website. The page doesn't reload when you click on tabs. In 2010, that was a big deal. Most people did not know how to do something like this. And I had to figure this out because I couldn't ask someone for help, because the whole point of this exercise was creating a system by which others could ask each other for help. So we had to start there. So I spent a long time learning about how to do these things, built the website, found a bunch of people that I knew who could talk about this subject, got them together and said, let's put up an agenda where we have a bunch of people who will speak about this topic. And I had to essentially go dig into other communities and say, who do I know who is good with this topic, let's go find them together. So this is the agenda that we had for the first ever event, which was in October 9, 2010. And I was one of the speakers, but I managed to convince a bunch of others to come in and also speak at this event. So one problem solved. Essentially get a bunch of people and say, if you please give me the patience of waiting for a month, I will get the other side of this thing arranged and go get an audience as well. Okay. So the second part, obviously getting an audience. Now getting an audience tends to be a fairly simple problem because anytime you say something interesting, somebody will say, hey, that sounds interesting, I want to be there. As long as you're not charging the money, it's easy. So this was a slightly easier problem. All I had to do was put up a website and say, here's a registration form, put your name and email address, and you get an invite. So we got a few hundred people that way. The third part is we had to host this somewhere. Now, if you're trying to get 300 people, you need a room that can fit 300 people. Where are you going to get a room that can fit 300 people? Ideally, without having to pay for it. So this is a point where I had to now sell this to someone else and say, please give me your space, it's good for you. So in this case, the Indian Institute of Management hosted this event. And I'm sure you're wondering, why is the Indian Institute of Management interested in HTML5 and web programmers? Well, they're not, as simple as that. But they run an incubation program called the NSR Cell, where they host companies that are essentially doing something new. Okay? And that is a fringe department of IIM. That IIM itself thinks of this as one small corner case because IIM typically teaches management students who are dealing with multi-crore businesses. And they have a small fringe group, which they said is for businesses that are starting from scratch. Okay? Today it's called an accelerator or an incubator. Back then it was again a new concept. So I went there and told them that these days, if you're doing a new business, you need a website, which means you need to hire programmers, which means they need to know how to build websites. So why don't I bring some 300 people who are interested in programming to your campus? Maybe some of them will be interested in the companies that you've got over here. Okay. So that was the sale that I had to make. They accepted it, gave me the venue for free and said, go ahead, do an event over here. Now the fourth problem is, once you bring in 300 people into a room, and you keep them there for the full day, you've got to feed them. Unfortunately for us as humans, you can't just say that I will go on a diet for the full day and be happy at the end of it. Unfortunately, the human body needs to be fed every 3 or 4 hours. You can't help it. Okay? And if you want to say, I'm not responsible for lunch, I'm sorry, this is a free event, please go to the nearby restaurant, eat and come back. Now what's going to happen if 300 people end up in a nearby restaurant? You spend 6 hours ordering food there because they can't prepare food for 300 people in, within half an hour notice. So you have to then commit to a kitchen nearby and say, I'm going to send 300 people your way and here is some money to essentially pay for the food because the food is not free. Okay? And this was the problem. Now NSR Cell wouldn't give me food for free, they would just give me the menu for free. So we had to go find a sponsor. And this was the hardest part of the problem because I'm some random idiot saying I'm going to acquire 300 people and put them in a room and say HTML5 and you please give me money for food. How to pull together the 4 components of an event. Now I ended up selling the event to NSR Cell, convincing them that it was good for them to have a bunch of software programmers show up in their venue. And finally I ended up selling it to Microsoft, which had a very valid reason to be interested in this audience because it was about saying that Internet Explorer 6, even we acknowledge is a bad browser and needs to be removed. And we introduced a new browser called Internet Explorer 9, which is the point where we say, people, please stop hating us so much. We also care about making a good browser. Now, that was the message they had to send. And you put that in a newspaper, people are going to say, what is wrong with Microsoft? Why are they saying sorry? Because the general audience doesn't understand this. It's only a developer who gets a frustration of dealing with bad software. So you should not be putting out a negative message to a general audience. You should put it only to a special audience which actually needs this message. And that's why they came to this event. Plain and simple. So what we did essentially is create a system where I got a bunch of people to speak. Most of these are people I did not know before this event. These are people I discovered in the process of essentially auditioning for the event and saying that, do you know something about the topic? Can you speak? Can I convince you to come and speak at my event? Okay. Brought together an audience, brought in a venue, brought in a sponsor to pay for it, did the event, and it ended up that Microsoft gave me more money than was required for lunch, so I actually made a profit. So, no, we did not pay the speakers at this point because it was a free audience event. Okay? Now, one of the reasons we did not pay is because until 1 week before the event, I did not have Microsoft as a sponsor. So I was paying for the whole damn thing out of my own pocket. Okay? And in a sense, it was about telling everyone that I'm taking the risk. I will make sure this happens. I will make sure I pay for everyone's lunch. I will make sure that the whole thing is well done, regardless of whether there is financial support or not. And therefore, as being the risk bearer, it came down to being saying, okay, then I'm also taking the profit. Okay? So that was the first event. Obviously, a company like Microsoft is used to the fact that they're so successful. And despite a corporate agenda that says, there seems to be a problem with people thinking of IE6 as a bad browser, let's go fix it. The problem is that as a company, they're used to the fact that everybody thinks they're the greatest. And so they sent a speaker who made this mistake on stage, who basically said, Internet Explorer 9 is the best browser ever. At which point people are saying, what the fuck, man? Have you never heard of Chrome? Okay? And this happened on stage, and the audience heckled the speaker continuously throughout his talk. Okay? And unfortunately, this was a speaker who did not realize that he was talking to a hostile crowd, that he had to pacify and say, look, we are trying to do better. No? The company understood this when they sponsored the event and sent the speaker. The speaker did not understand this, got heckled thoroughly. Was from Microsoft, one of the speakers. I wanted a speaker from Microsoft because ultimately you have to say, bunch of us talking as developers is nowhere as good as the creator of the browser coming out to speak. Because you want the guy who's responsible for the current mess to come and say, I'm responsible. And therefore, I wanted this guy even though he was a sponsored speaker. Okay? So this happened. And this left us really nervous because if you essentially have someone who's giving you money and you're saying bad things about them and the audience is saying boo, am I going to get paid or not? Okay? So you can imagine palpitations going on at that point. It turns out Microsoft was so shaken up by this that it went all the way up to their management until it went down to the guy who's responsible for developer evangelism across India. And the guy looked at this and said, oh, it's a new audience. And this guy fortunately saw the light and said, we as a company seem to have missed on a certain audience that we have not been talking to out of habit, and therefore we don't know what's going on in this country. We don't know how many of these people exist. So let's go talk to them some more. So they came back and said, why don't we do more of these events across the country? Let's go do an all-India tour. So I said, great, okay, finally somebody is making my dream possible. I want to create a community where I get people who are interested in the web to come and talk to each other. And I have accidentally made a very successful sale where somebody, because they got heckled by an audience, realized that they were doing something fundamentally wrong and had to do more of this to go understand his audience and talk to them and so forth. Okay? So that's how the first event started off. Now, doing it one time doesn't mean that this is how you do it forever. Because when you think of this as fundamentally being a marketplace, that someone's pushing an idea from stage, someone in the audience is consuming this idea and maybe accepting it, maybe rejecting it, but they're criticizing the idea. Okay? Now this is the fundamental thing you have to think of, that your speaker is not on stage to preach. Your speaker is on stage to have the idea questioned. Okay? That is the point of speaking. You do that, then you've figured out that you've essentially created an actual marketplace where there is an incentive for the speaker to come on stage. Because now it's not about saying that I'm giving my gyan and you better compensate me for this, but it's about saying that this is what I think and maybe I learned something from the audience in the process. Okay? So we had to then say that no, this is the formula that we're going by, and therefore you need to go build out this community and do more. So the next event that I did, now we also have a habit of documenting everything we do, so all of this is online. The next event I did was an experiment at saying, can we now charge the audience? If you now created a system where people are actually engaging with the speaker and like what they're getting, can you tell people, okay, now you pay for your lunch. Don't depend on a sponsor. Because the sponsor may or may not show up. And so the next event I did, in October we did, of 2010, we did DocType HTML5. Over the next few months, we did a cross-country tour where we essentially did the event for free in multiple cities. And then we came back to Bangalore and said, okay, let's do something else now. create an unconference where there is no speaker who's selected in advance, because that was something that actually bothered me a lot. The fact that it was speaking by invitation, which essentially meant that I was the tyrant. Okay? If you don't, now you guys understand what the word tyrant means, right? Tyrant is essentially another way of saying dictator. That anytime you create a system where there is a tyrant who decides because he thinks like this and this is how the world should work, you got a system where this person's flaws essentially permeate the entire system. Okay? And that was my fear, that I can't create a community that is about what I think is right. Because I may be an idiot and not know this, and I'm doing something idiotic and nobody's telling me, and therefore I'm wasting my time and not realizing it. So the thing to do, we bootstrap the community by saying that I can only solve one problem at a time, and therefore I will invite a bunch of speakers to make it simple. But then I don't want to become the tyrant, because then that creates future problems. And so I had to remove myself in the picture and say, I'm not the important person, the community can decide for themselves. So this event, the next experiment was to say that in fact there is no speakers who have been appointed as speakers. You want to speak? Put your hand up, speak. Now this is the unconference model. This is what Barcamp does. In fact, there's Barcamp going on today and follows exactly the same model. And I used to be a Barcamp organizer, so it was something that I fundamentally believed in. And I want to say, let's do it again. But we have to solve our lunch problem. If you depend on a sponsor putting in lunch money, then you always will be nervous about whether the money is going to come or not. And in the case of Dr. HTML5, until 1 week before the event, I was looking at a 50,000 rupee loss in lunch money if I didn't get a sponsor. And one of the things that happens in this situation is that if you keep worrying about a sponsor, you'll eventually become the sponsor's employee, of sorts. I mean, you may not be employed, but you'll always do things that are good for a sponsor, because ultimately that's who's paying for everything. So, second experiment, can we get people to pay for themselves? You pay for your own lunch money. So we did this event where we said, there are no speakers, you want to speak, you come and put your name on the board and that's it, you're a speaker. And second, you have to pay for this. So you have to pay 300 rupees to come to this event, whether you're speaking or not, everybody pays. And that goes for your lunch. So we did that fairly nervously, succeeded. And one of the reasons it succeeded is because now I have to sell it to people and say, this is why you are going to pay 300 rupees. Okay? In fact, this is the page that sold it. This is all there is to the site. There is nothing else. As you can see from top to bottom, this is it. So this page convinced 150 people to pay 300 rupees. What is it about this page that convinced someone to make that kind of investment? So it may not be obvious, but one, Android. In 2011, you talk about Android. Who's got an Android phone now? Everybody, right? In 2011, did you have an Android phone? Yeah, somebody's always trying to sell me something. So, in 2011, Android was still this exotic thing that we kept hearing about. So, the simple fact of picking the right topic meant that people will say, 300 rupees is not much. What would have cost me if I went out and had lunch in a nice place? So, let's spend 300 rupees, go figure out something new. So, you select on the basis of the topic being interesting to a lot of people right now. You're hearing about it elsewhere, therefore you want to come. The second thing is this little fine print over here. It says a day before the Cricket World Cup finals. As it turns out, this was the World Cup that India won. Okay? The World Cup was on April 2. The finals was in April 2. And the semi-finals was on March 31st. So April 1st was a holiday in the cricketing calendar. Okay? And we had this nervousness throughout this planning process of saying, we want to do an event because it's been a while since we did one. But what do you do when this World Cup's going on here? Nobody's going to come. They're all going to be watching the World Cup. So to say, okay, there's 1 day gap when there's no match going on. It's a working day, but damn it, take the risk. There is no other day that anybody's going to come anyway. So do it on this Friday. Tell people, hey, there is no cricket today. You can come. It's safe. Okay? Now that was why people came. Because that line where you show the fact that you are actually thinking about your audience is something that people will pick up and pass on to others and say, hey, these guys are funny. That these guys are funny, they seem to know what they're doing, and it's an interesting topic, and look at these cute cartoons, man, Back then, obviously, now it's very banal, but back then it was like, ooh, nice, Android cartoons. So, simple thing, sold the damn event. 100 people came for this. So, this was the second one.
How do you manage to have conversations going? Because the tricky part of organizing something like this is if you end up with you said it's for geeks and suits.
Yes.
What happens if you end up with a bunch of people who want to know about Android because they don't know anything about it?
Not welcome.
No, they want to do it. I mean, created by side.
That's the thing. See, remember, so part of what we do is also to be obscure.
Okay.
Be obscure. And this is an intentional aspect of everything that I've done so far. That there is no introduction to newbies in this page, nor in the previous web page. Okay? So what you have to do is try not to get too large an audience, because you want that specialization. Now, while the camera was off, remember I was telling you that the way you get an advertiser is by giving them an audience that they can't get anywhere else. Okay? And if you get too generic an audience, you've lost the plot. Okay? The audience will have confusion talking to each other because they don't understand what the other guy is talking about. Some guy wants to talk about the most basic things about how do I buy an Android phone and connect my Google account. Another guy is more interested in talking about how to deal with an API level thing. Now these two people have nothing in common with each other. Okay? And you've got to decide which of these do you want. Now typically the guy who's doing something more advanced is the one that has a more difficult time finding other people like himself, okay, or herself. So in general, it's a good idea to say, forget about the newbies, they can figure it out for themselves. Always deal with an advanced crowd. You will always have the newbies come in anyway for aspiration, because everybody wants to learn something more advanced, okay, which is okay. Yeah? They'll probably be a little lost, but they'll figure out how to understand what's going on, and it's something slightly more advanced than their level.
That was a problem, right? Because in 2017, you had Facebook advertising as a world advertising.
Yeah.
So, and a website by nature is for the world at large.
Yes.
I could, hit upon this website in 2011 when I had no clue, but just not up.
Yeah. So
I did. So that's why I want to know why.
So the point of this thing is that there is no introduction. What is this about? You heard about Android, but what is going on here? You see? The very fact that it does not say is what sold the event.
There is a lot of obscurity in the way the words are used.
Exactly. So you have to be very careful about this, that you use the words that are obscure to a general audience, but meaningful to a special audience. And this is part of the sales process, that you sell it by being understandable only to the right audience. Okay? So that was one aspect.
Now, the class of the day, you chose Friday and one day prior to work.
Yes.
So, why did you choose Sunday as opposed to Friday? Or what was behind, let's go on a working day?
Okay.
Expect people to mount campaigns.
Do you guys remember which was the two countries in the World Cup finals that year? India and Sri Lanka. Now what happens if India loses? Do you think anybody will come to this event on Sunday? You had to do it when they were still, hopeful. Don't do it when people are upset. If they're celebrating because India won, they're not going to come anyway. They're going to be out drinking somewhere. So, the weekend thing is a little overhyped. People tend to think that you have to do it on weekends, otherwise they'll not give up work and come on. In fact, think of it as a sale. I'm selling you something, you know why you're choosing this over going to your office, you will come. Okay? So, after this we got a little more ambitious and did this event, at which point the ticket price went up to 700 rupees. And now I had to get serious about making a nice website. So we built this website. I'm just going to scroll by slowly so you can see it. To start with the premise, now we picked one very particular problem. A lot of people are talking about cloud computing. You want to do an event about cloud computing, you'll have a bunch of guys giving you gyan about how data is stored in the clouds and whatever bullshit. That's not what a developer actually cares about. A developer says, I know what this thing is about, but how do I get inside? How do I start? So it's a pick one very specific problem that enough people have as a problem, and say, let's talk about that one step. So this event was about saying, if you're a PHP programmer, and PHP, much as some of us don't like it, including me, is a very popular programming language. Okay? And if you write software in PHP, you tend to know how to deal with the situation where it's running on one computer. In fact, most PHP apps cannot be used on more than one server at a time. For instance, if you use WordPress, it stores files in a particular folder on disk, and therefore if you run it from two servers, the second server doesn't have the same file, and so it will not work. Okay? MediaWiki, same problem. Most PHP applications, same problem. So this was about saying, how do you now write your software in a way that can run from two servers? What do you need to think about so that your data is shared and there's nothing that is dependent on the physical configuration of one machine? One problem alone. And obviously, you need to get people excited with the whole idea that it's all in the clouds. So it looks like it's up in the clouds with planes flying around. And as you get around, there's more stuff that essentially stays in the air. Finally get to your agenda. And then you reach the ground level where there's a map. And then the credits. These are the people who helped make the event possible. Always give credit. It's very, very important. If you don't credit the people who made it possible, they'll not come back next time. As simple as that. Okay? So we ended up building this. This was a point where I also had to say that, it's gotten to a point where people are not going to come if they don't know who's speaking. If you are saying that this is an event about this particular topic and there is no clear agenda, in Android camp it worked because it was such a hot topic that everybody was saying, I need to know something about this, I'll come, I don't care about anything else. When you talk about PHP, on the other hand, it's something that's been around for more than 10 years. So now you're trying to sell someone knowledge and say, I will teach you step A to step B. Okay? But if I don't tell you that this is what I'm teaching you, you'll not come. And this website does not actually tell you anything. So I had to get a bunch of speakers now, again, the same way that I've done for doctype HTML5. But there was this problem of being the tyrant that I didn't want to get into. I didn't want to be the guy saying that I know who's a good speaker, I will decide who gets to be on stage. We'll instead turn it over to the crowd and say, you propose to speak, everybody else accepted you. Karan.hasgeek.com went up at that point to say, here are a bunch of events that we are organizing. If you want to speak, please tell the world that you want to speak. In fact, the submission process for this event is over here. So this was July 9, 2011, as you can see. And these are all the people who proposed to speak. So 28 people proposed that they will come and speak at this event, out of which about 20 got selected and ended up speaking at the event. Okay? So after this, it's basically just become the same thing, slightly more elaborate, that there is a process by which you select speakers and they're reviewed by their peers. Therefore, it doesn't matter if I know the topic or not, because other people know the topic and they will ensure that the speaker who's selected knows what he's talking about. The audience gets to know who's going to speak, gets to be involved in the process, that they can in fact accept a speaker or reject a speaker by voting for them. The sponsor has a very specialized audience and therefore it's good for them. And because we are now collecting money, we can actually pay the people who support the rest of it. Okay? So this is how we built a community of people offline. Okay? Now I'll talk about the online part. I know you guys are waiting for lunch, so I'm going to do this as quickly as possible. One of the things that happened as a result of doing these events is there was always someone who would come and say, hey, you've got a bunch of smart people here. I'm looking for a programmer. Can you recommend one to me? I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, but I don't know these people. They're not my friends. I mean, I sold tickets. People came and sat in the audience. If you want to tell one of these guys to come and work for you, sponsor the event. Put a banner up there. If you want to come and ask me for a personal recommendation and say, please tell me who's a good programmer, I'd say, I don't know these people. Yeah. And so this got to be a big enough problem that at one point you say, you know what, I'm going to build a website where you go figure out for yourself who you want to get. And that is this website. So this went up in March 2011. This went up, in fact, before Android Camp. It went up after doctype HTML5, and it's more or less looked the same since then. The appearance has not changed. The interface aspect of this came from the way we used to do this at the event. At the event, if you came and said, I'm looking for a programmer, I would say, here's a sticky note, go paste it on the wall. Maybe somebody will see it and talk to you. So we had done this enough times, so we took this metaphor online and said, okay, here's a bunch of sticky notes that say that this is what somebody is looking for. Maybe a programmer will see this and apply to you. Okay? So we built this up over time. Now, something to learn about the job market. Once again, you're dealing with a marketplace here. This website is a marketplace. Who are the parties here? Employer, job seeker. Okay. So, to use a single word term, employer and candidate. Okay. Yeah. So I'm just going to use it because I'm going to use the word a lot. So you have an employer on one side, you have a candidate on the other side, and they both have expectations of each other, right? As an employer, you want someone who can do the damn job, and who can do it without being an idiot and essentially being difficult to work with. Very simple expectations from an employer, And there is this very common lament that you keep hearing about employers, from employers, that people in India are not hireable. Engineering graduates don't know anything about computers, therefore you can't hire them. You have to go through this process of training them. People tend to lie about their resumes. People tend to tell you all kinds of bullshit. So this is a very common refrain that is very public in the media. Anytime you hear about the job market, you will hear employers complaining about the quality of candidates. Okay? So I came in here thinking that in fact this is wrong. The problem is the reverse. That the way to approach this problem is by not saying, I will pick the smartest people and put them on a showcase for you, but rather, the number of people who are actually talented is very small. The number of open jobs are fairly large, right? So you're dealing with the job market where if a candidate is talented, he's got a lot of choice. An employer, on the other hand, has to be the one making the efforts to say, look, I'm better than this other employer, please come and apply here. Okay? So the typical understanding of the job market is that you need to filter candidates, they're mostly junk, hire the good guys. The way I took it and said, no, that's actually the reverse of the problem. The problem is that there are too many employers who are simply not interesting. So if you're a good candidate, we will make everybody stand in line and you choose which one of these guys sounds interesting to you. So you make it like a swayamvar, but in reverse. Typically, the company says, we are hiring for this position, 100 people, please come today for an interview. We'll interview all of you and see which one of you is good. What we did instead, turn it around. All you employers stand in line, let the candidate decide which one of you guys is good. And then he'll apply for the job. So now the first thing you have to do was, if I have a smart guy visiting this website, and there are lots of jobs here, I don't want junk jobs over here because it will make everybody look bad. Right? So when we set up this thing, the way to post a job is over there. It says there that just fill in over there and say, okay, what am I looking for? Yeah, I'm going to say something idiotic like this because unfortunately employers tend to make statements like this, that I'm not interested in anybody who's not a rock star, or I want a ninja, or I want an awesome dude. So you get taken through the process of saying, okay, let's go describe your job. Now, what happens is, when you start doing this, and so this is what it looks like after you post a job. Okay, so this is the very first job posted on this job board. This is something I posted myself as a way to test the job board. And very soon people start posting jobs like this. India's Android king. What's the company name? We'll tell you after you apply. So the guy says something like this, right? And he doesn't even bother to describe the company. Instead, startup looking for someone. Okay? So I am secret. I'm not going to tell you anything about myself. You tell me who you are, then I'll tell you who I am. That's when you say, you know what? I don't want you idiots on my job board. Please get lost. Next guy says, you see that line there at the beginning? That was the caption that said, okay, here is an example headline. This guy is so lazy, he writes in, what's the example headline directly? And says, I'm looking for some guy, It's the rest is all in the air. You come and tell me what you want. Who you are and why you're good and so on. So the first thing I do is to say, get rid of these idiots. Given the problem, there are very few smart people and there are so many open jobs. So get rid of the junk jobs. Like people only see the jobs that are worth going for. Okay? So now this is essentially how you define a marketplace and make it something that both parties find useful to each other. Okay? So when we start doing this, now let's say I do this, I'm going to leave the rest blank and submit this and see what happens. Okay? What does it say here? you have had a bit too much awesome around here lately, you have another adjective or not. Right? So you'll say, okay, I don't want to say I'm awesome, I'm just going to say at my company. You're not reaching out to hire a rockstar. You've got another word. So what you do is essentially shape behavior by saying, I don't like that behavior. You're spoiling the decorum of the community by behaving like an idiot. And therefore, I'm going to filter you out right now, that you're not allowed to behave like an idiot. Okay? So the form essentially does a bunch of validations like this that says, there is something wrong with the way you're describing a job, please redo it. Okay? If you can't do this, you're not even going to show up on the website. Okay? So this is something that essentially became a situation of saying, as a community manager, I'm going to watch what people are doing on this job board, and if somebody is behaving in a manner that is essentially spoiling the atmosphere, then you do something to stop their behavior. In some cases, it's as simple as saying you're not allowed to use certain terms. In some cases, it's slightly more elaborate. It's about saying, I will make you a phone call and tell you that you can't make a post like this, there is a problem with this, stop doing it. So we went through a bunch of iterations, learning what happens when you try to build a marketplace where there are candidates on one side and there are employees on the other side. And in the middle of this, a third party suddenly shows up and tries to be an interfering party. Yeah. So what kind of third party do you typically expect in recruitment? The agents. So remember that the recruitment agent is someone who specializes in withholding information until you pay up. To an employer, they will not show candidates until you say, okay, I will pay you 1 month's salary if they come through. That's a typical recruitment fee. To the candidate, you'll say, I will not tell you who's hiring, because if I tell you who's hiring, you'll go apply to them directly and I will lose my commission. Okay? So a recruitment agent is someone who specializes in withholding information for their own benefit. And my goal with this job board was to say, get rid of that category entirely. That this category is a problem in our society because they're essentially putting their financial gain over providing value to both parties. And therefore, get rid of them and create a system which is transparent. Unfortunately, it's not that easy to get rid of them because when you put up a list of jobs over here, what you're essentially saying is here is a database of companies who are looking for employees. So this becomes a pitching ground. That the recruitment agent will say, okay, this company is looking for a candidate. Let me call them up and say, by the way, I am offering services. It's better than this job board. Please come to me. So this became a recurring problem that recruitment agents would keep bothering people on the job board, saying, I can provide you a better service than this job board, so don't waste your time here, talk to me. And we kept getting complaints. And for me, it was a question, what do you do now? By virtue of the fact that you created an open space where anybody can publish, you've also created a space where people can find out contact details of other people and harass them. So one of the things we started doing at this point was to say, okay, we are going to change the system so that we will not reveal your contact information on the website anymore. Instead, people have to apply through the website and only then you will get to know each other. And we will make sure that until you both are satisfied with each other, nobody's contact information is revealed. Okay? So this is what we ended up having to do. So what happens here, for instance, is that some people post like this. Okay? Now since Rockstar is banned, I'll say total something slightly more banal, which will not pass. But company says, please talk to me directly. Oops, there's a typo in the address. Do not include contact information. Okay. Now this is essentially banned. That anything that looks like an email address or phone number, you're not allowed to post it in the listing. The candidate should not be allowed to contact you until they go through the process. Okay. So in fact, one of the things that we did was post a job ourselves, and what it says here at the bottom is that if you want to apply for this job, there is no email address provided of the employer anymore, but at the bottom is a form. This is my name, this is the email address I want to share with the company, this is my phone number, and apply and submit. So what happens here? The recruiter has to now go through my system to contact the employer. And the employer can say, this guy just spammed me. At this point I can say, okay, block this guy's account. Don't let him apply to anyone else anymore. So what I've done now is by creating a conduit for information, saying that now I've become the recruiter, essentially, saying that I am withholding information until you guys behave properly. But doing it in a way that's not about financial gain, but rather about building the ecosystem. And essentially creating transparency that says anybody can look up any job and decide if it's worth going for. And creating it in a way that does not lead to harassment by outsiders. Okay. So, for instance, among the people who applied for this job, this is a random example. Here is some guy who applied, chap named Davandale, who said, this is all that he said about himself. Now, in this case, the guy who didn't really proper details, so he said, I'm sorry, but you don't seem to know what this job is about, so we're rejecting you. But what you get here is that Mitesh is my colleague, and therefore he's put a test submission. And I can say, I'm going to report this guy for spam because he's wasting my time, in which case then there's a notice to the site administrator, okay, this guy is suspicious, maybe you should block his account. Or I can say, hey, you sound interesting, why don't you call me now, here's my phone number. Okay. So what happens here is that by controlling certain behaviors and by requiring people to behave in a certain manner to even use this job board, you create a system where it actually works for people without being a harassment tool. And this is essentially how you build online communities, that you think of it as a marketplace, everybody wants something from this, and you design a flow for them that leads them to the outcome they're interested in. Right? So that's about it. Happy to take any questions. I believe we are late for lunch, so I'll understand if you don't want to ask questions right now.